German army in World War II.
And an all-around weirdo.
Yeah, kind of a strange guy. He lived in a basement apartment. He was their gardener, the Skakel's gardener. He lived in an apartment in the basement, and his wife on that weekend was away, so it was just him in the apartment. So, and he had an exit from the house that would have allowed him, to get out, murder Martha, come back undetected. Which doesn't prove anything. But the Skakel kid said that sometimes he would tell them really strange stories from World War II about how they would, he and the other German soldiers would go around raping women and stuff, which is kind of a strange thing to be saying to a bunch of teenage kids.
Teenage dudes, though?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, but you got to also remember that he probably was messed with a lot by the kids. They probably made fun of him, and they probably screwed with him a lot. If he was in the war, it wasn't uncommon for guys to shell shock, shell shock, so he's got some issues because of that. So he's just like, you know what? I think it's okay to tell you little... different word I was going to use, you little jerks who are screwing with me all the time, a story that I know is going to really screw you up a little bit and get you back.
Maybe. I don't know.
I mean, again, this is right up there with Mr. Ed as a reasoning.
Yeah, he's the only other thing that makes him look even possibly good is there were diary entries in Martha's diary. I didn't mention Martha had a diary.
No, you haven't brought this up yet.
Martha had a diary, yeah, and eventually wound up in the hands of the prosecution. But there were entries in there relating to Franz. He was referred to as Frank in there, and she talked about how she was really creeped out by Frank. And thought he was really a scary guy. Mm-hmm. And
understandably.
Afterwards, Dorothy Moxley started reading Martha's diary after the death to see if there was any good information in there, obviously. And she asked some of Martha's friends, like, who is Frank? Because she seems to really be really afraid of Frank. I believe it was Sheila McGuire who identified him as Franz the teen. That could only be Franz who was Frank. And apparently, after the prosecution of the police took the diary and kept it in evidence for many years, Dorothy spent years lobbying to get it back. By the time she got it back, the pages relating to Frank had been removed. Yeah. But Franz did take a lie detector test, which he passed, and so they dropped him as a suspect.
Well, he's a cold-hearted Nazi. Of course he passed.
Yeah, that's true. He didn't have a sociopath.
Yeah, I don't think he's a good candidate for this.
Nah, there's not really much of anything to tie him to this crime. So let's move on to our next suspect here, which is Ken Littleton, the live-in tutor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He, there was, again, no physical evidence connecting Kenny to the crime at all. And nothing that connects anybody, really. The thing about Kenny is he lost his job with the Skakels a few months after the murder because he was drunk and he crashed their car and apparently left the accident scene. So he kind of got fired by Rucky. Mm-hmm. And so he after that he was sort of drifting around. He got a job as a bouncer in a bar up in I forget, Providence or somewhere like that.
It's weird that he went from working in a high-class school and being a tutor to quite quickly not doing that kind of work. And I wonder if
it's not weird to me.
Well, I was wondering if he got blacklisted.
I'm sure he got blacklisted.
Because the Skakels were like, this guy, no.
No, the Skakels didn't blacklist him.
No?
What happened is he kept his job teaching, but then in the summer, as a teacher, you go. He wanted to, I can't remember where it was. It wasn't Fire Island. I can't remember where it was. But,
okay.
Yeah, but he went to this beach community where he'd hung out the summer before and got a job as a bouncer in a bar and hung out and stuff.
Okay.
But
so it was just kind of a summer job.
Yeah, kind of a summer job kind of deal. But he went on a little crime wave. He broke into some houses and businesses and stole stuff. He broke into one woman's apartment. She had left a window open. He removed the screen, climbed in, and she woke up to find him lying naked on top of her. Yeah. He did a lot of stuff like that.
I'm sorry, I ascribed more time between that and the Skakel thing, so never mind.
He had a bit of a mental breakdown.
Yeah, his behavior was strange, and so what happened is that eventually the police found out about these crimes. The Greenwich police did, and so they ratted him out to the school that he worked at, and so he immediately got fired, of course.
And so now I understand why he gets blacklisted. Okay.
He didn't get blacklisted then, but then he got a job teaching at another school.
Oh my God.
And the police immediately went down there and ratted him out again. So he got fired again. And so things were kind of going downhill for Ken.
Yeah, it's days like these that I'm happy that the internet exists, so that like the police don't have to actually track people anymore.
Yeah.
That there's like a database
because
that'll
sadly,
be like, hey, don't hire this person because they like to break in and lay naked on strangers.
Because sadly, there was a time where there was a lot of departments that just were overworked and they couldn't do it.
Yeah. Another odd thing that happened is that Tommy went into Ken's room in the house. Ken was sitting there watching The French Connection. Remember that movie? Gene Hackman? Yeah. Back in those days, I don't know if they even still do this because I don't watch TV anymore, but the networks in those days would run theatrical release movies, like say 9 to 11 or whatever.
They don't do that anymore.
Yeah, they don't do that anymore?
No, God, no.
Yeah, and so, but they used to do it back in those days, so The French Connection was showing on TV, and so Tommy went into his room at about 10:15 and started watching the movie, because there's this big, huge, famous chase scene in the movie, and so he stayed through the end of the whole chase scene. So that sort of maybe kind of makes Tommy look a little better as far as,
Tommy Skakel, yeah.
Because he would he have had time to murder Martha and then get all cleaned up and then go in there and watch TV with Ken? Well, we'll talk about that. But
so Tommy was able to provide an alibi for Ken.
They kind of alibied each other.
They kind of alibi each other, but
one
of the things that Tommy noticed, though, that was kind of strange is he said it was warm in the room, and yet the whole time that he was there watching The French Connection, Kenny was covered with a blanket from head to toe. I mean, not his face, but I mean from the bottom of his chin all the way, he was covered with a blanket.
Like he was laying in bed?
No, he was sitting in a chair.
Oh, but
sitting in a chair or a recliner or something like that, but he was covered with a blanket. Tommy thought that was a little strange.
Well,
yeah, but you know what? I have laid around and watched TV, and it is very easy to get a bit of a chill. It's October. Yes, the heat is off. And I'm just going to throw a blanket on.
This is a conversation I have actually a lot with my boss because we share an office. And his job is very like get up and go, right? He gets up, he's often like around, and then he comes back into the office, whereas I'm sitting at my desk the whole time.
Yeah, so
and I'll have the heat on.
You got the heat issue, yeah.
And he comes in and he's like, "It is boiling in here. What are you doing?" And I can also imagine that it's that sort of situation that Tommy's been out. He's been drinking.
He's hanging out with his friends.
He's like, "Oh, it's warm in this room." And Ken's been sitting in there and he's like, "It is cold. I'm going to put a blanket on."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily prove much of anything.
Well, but it's also a little weird.
And there's also there is a huge body temperature difference perception of teenagers to the rest of the adult world.
That's true, and your metabolism's slowing it down a little bit.
Yeah, I see them, teenagers this time of year running around. It's 60 degrees and they're in a pair of basketball shorts, and that's it. Yeah. And they're like, "Man, it is so hot out." It's like, what?
Yeah. But also, again, I presume that Ken, new to his job, hadn't been drinking nearly as much as the rest of the kids.
Probably not.
Right? He was trying to take responsibility. So if Tommy had been drinking the whole night or had been making out with a girl and came back in,
his blood be pumping.
Yeah.
So Ken is he seems to have been pretty much cleared, I think.
Yeah.
There was some discussion that among police and everybody that he maybe was a serial killer.
I think the police are dumb.
Well, yeah. I mean,
not overall. I'm sorry, but just in this case,
people like some women got bludgeoned to death in various places that were not far from places that he was living. But that doesn't necessarily mean much,
No.
I was going to say, women have been bludgeoned to death not far away from places that you've lived, and yet as far as I'm aware, it wasn't you.
No, I don't think it was.
And that guy who's serving time, he seems to have probably been the culprit. So.
Most likely.
Yeah.
Well, I think Kenny has been kind of cleared because in 1998 they had a grand jury, and in Connecticut law is you can have what's called a grand jury of one, where you basically there's one judge who is the jury. He decides if there's probable cause, if it's really worth indicting somebody, and so they brought Kenny Littleton in, but under Connecticut law he had to be immunized. So he could confess to killing Martha, and there would not have been a thing they could do, because as long as he told the truth, about whatever. And you have to assume that they asked Kenny then.
Immunity. Sorry, I was like, immunized? He's got to get a shot?
Yeah. Judicial immunity. He So presumably they asked him if he had murdered Martha, and presumably Kenny said no. Of course, he could have lied, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. But,
You know, saying you're telling a guy he has immunity and that guy believing it can be very two different things.
I've seen
Yeah.
CSI. I know what's up.
Yeah.
I watch Law and Order. I know.
yeah. Let's say that Kenny really did do it.
Okay.
But he wanted to lie about it. But at this time, this is like hard times for Kenny. He's had a rough life, right? He's been sort of like, floating from job to job and place to place. So, suppose he really did it. You know what I would do if I had been Ken? I would have gone to the Skakels and I would have said, hey, tell you what, if you give me a suitcase full of cash, I'll go into that jury room, the grand jury room, and I will tell them that I murdered Martha Moxley.
Yeah.
And that'll be the end of it for all of you.
Yeah.
You know? And just make sure it's cash in 20s and 10s.
Non-sequential.
Yeah, and just do that.
Well, and I'm amazed. I mean, you say that with a bit of humor, but I'm amazed that there's always this talk of Kennedy families having all this money and they can buy whatever they need. And I'm amazed that nobody has walked up and said, it was me, having been paid for said testimony.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not trying to cast anything negative against him. It's just that there's, you've got a lot of money. You can just you can convince a guy that for X amount of money, you take the fall, dude.
Well, especially, in the case of Kenny, suppose Kenny didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
They still, you kind of, and suppose somebody in the Skakel family did do it, and they're rich, and they're, of course, all powerful and everything, and wouldn't they have offered him like a suitcase full of cash?
Yeah,
in order to
that's my thing.
lie and say
You
they
would
did
think.
it? You'd think they would have, Well, even today, I mean, if they have all this money and power, of course, the Skakels are not wealthy anymore, unfortunately, but if they had all this money and power, they could give somebody a suitcase full of cash to confess to the crime. And since somebody's already been convicted of the crime, well, good luck getting a conviction of somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Tommy Skakel. He was a favorite for a long time. Let's see. Last to see Martha alive. Tommy had a head injury when he was young, very young, and that caused a change in his behavior. When he was prone to violent outbursts, I mean, very violent, where he had to be physically restrained, and he would damage things, break things, and
Did he? But that seems like the sort of thing that takes hours to calm down from, right? Usually.
not necessarily, but I think it was either his sister or his brother, or maybe it was Michael, who said that he was like milk boiling on a stove. You ever boiled milk?
Yep.
You know how it looks like totally calm, and then the next second it's just like boosh, it's up over the sides of the pan and all over. Yeah. He said he was like that. So it took nothing apparently to set him off. And also Ken Littleton was not sure afterwards. He thought that perhaps Tommy had changed his clothes. He couldn't really remember.
Yeah, that's not something you pay attention to unless it was you went from a really nice outfit to a crappy one, or from a crappy one to a really nice. Just changing your shirt or your jeans from one pair of jeans to another.
Yeah.
It's not really something you'd note.
Yeah, no, not really. I don't know if there was a dress code at the Bellhaven Club.
I'm sure there was.
There probably was.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to come back and change out of your slacks and your tie and get into something a little more casual.
Was Tommy a 32-inch waist?
No, Tommy was he was pretty athletic. He was not you were thinking of the 36-inch waist
36,
jeans.
yeah.
No, I don't think Tommy was nearly that big.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he was 17 years old, You're usually skinny at that age, right? So, yeah, I'm sure it wasn't Tommy. But what are the other reasons? I mean, of course, he lied about the whole book report thing. He was not in bed at 9:45.
But...
And so for that and many other reasons. But they spent a lot of... And, he failed his first... Well, he didn't really fail his first polygraph. It was inconclusive.
Well, so here's the question, I guess, right? One of the big things from the allegations was that when Ken did his bed check at 9:45, Tommy wasn't in his bed. But wasn't that because he was in Ken's room with Ken watching a video?
It was at the TV room.
He didn't go into Ken's room to watch the
Or he was in the
movie.
TV room, but he was with Ken when Ken was reportedly doing this bed check.
No, he was not.
It's after.
Yeah, it was after.
9:45 is the bed check. It was like
see.
quarter after 10 or 10:30, something like
That
that.
they started watching the
10:15.
movie?
Yeah, and Ken was already watching the movie,
I
and then
see.
Tommy just sort of wandered in and sat
Okay.
down and watched it with him.
Okay.
Yeah, again, no physical evidence. I mean, one of the things that would indicate to me that maybe it was Tommy is that, of course, there's that whole thing about the roll-down panties. Tommy was a real ladies' man.
he was flirting.
And he definitely of all of our suspects, Tommy is the most likely to pull down her pants for him.
So I don't want to get too graphic here, but correct me if I'm wrong, Joe. I swear I remember there was some discussion of the use of hands in a sexual manner from one or both of Martha and Tommy at some time. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was.
They were playing with each other?
That story changed in summer 1992.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not misremembering because that...
92.
Yeah. I'm kind of looking at this in two ways. I'm looking at Tommy as a suspect up until he changed his story.
Okay.
And then Tommy as a suspect after he changed his
So
story.
let's see. Okay, so we've done the before he changed his story.
Yeah, the before is he had an inclusive. It's kind of his polygraph results were never really all that conclusive, one way or the other. And there were reasons for the police to be suspicious, but obviously they couldn't get an indictment. The prosecutor refused to sign an indictment of him because they just didn't have any evidence. The evidence was he was the last person to see her alive. And he had some psychiatric issues, some violent outbursts. So what? Doesn't mean that doesn't prove anything, right? That didn't stop him from being a suspect.
Nope.
No, not at all. But we'll come back to Tommy in a minute.
Okay.
Let's talk about another suspect. Martha's brother, John Moxley. After he went and drove around a bit, he was outside searching, and Julie Skakel came out of the house, and she wanted to look too.
That's the mom?
Now, Julie is Michael's older sister. She was,
I'm sorry. Yeah, got it.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to keep track. There's a lot of names in here. So John was... he was actually polygraphed by the police. I think he passed, and so he was removed from the list of suspects. But I think it was Sheila, said that she was actually afraid of John Moxley, and he was known for violence. He was known to go after people with baseball bats a couple of times. Mm-hmm. Of course, he was a teenager, 17. Hey, I'm sure.
And privilege, there's no repercussions to my actions.
Yeah, possibly not. But when he was out with Julie didn't really remember this until much later when she went under hypnosis to try to restore some of her memories. Yeah,
and then she suddenly remembered.
Okay.
Suddenly remembers something. Yeah,
these conjured thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Suddenly remembered.
Hit me with it.
He was kind of over the Skakel place, kind of calling Martha's name, and he says to Julie, you should go over and look on our lawn. And Julie was like, "Why? You're yelling her name. She'd be able to hear it from over there if she's over there, right? And he was kind of insistent. He really wanted her to go over to the Moxley yard and look around. She thought it was kind of creepy and strange, in retrospect. The next thing that happened is in the morning.
Wait, that came out of hypnosis?
Yeah.
That was a recalled memory. And nobody can see this but us in the studio.
You're doing
I'm using the finger air quote thingy.
Yeah, the air quotes, yeah.
Which I do through every episode because everything is air quoted. Mm-hmm. But
memory is a really tricky thing.
It is.
It can be really seriously altered by just sheer repetition, if nothing else. And there's probably at least a few witnesses in this case who have had their memories altered.
Oh, yeah. Every time you remember something, you're altering it, you're overwriting it, and that's a known fact.
Yeah. That what you're remembering is actually the last time that you're remembering that thing.
Yeah.
You don't actually remember that thing anymore.
Yeah, you're overwriting the file every time you access it.
Yeah. So it gets a little degraded every time.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the next thing that happened is a friend of his came over at 9 o'clock the morning of 10/31, and John had been asleep in the TV room. This was something that got the guys at Sutton Associates, the private investigators, got them kind of interested in John as a suspect. And that is that he and his friend were thinking, well, we got to go out and look for Martha. Martha's missing. Mm-hmm. So they head out of the house, the Moxley house, and then they head towards the back of the house, which would have taken them right by the pine tree where Martha's body was. And this is something police will tell you, is that if there's a search party for a body or for somebody who's missing, then if a family member is part of that, if they're part of organizing it or they're out participating with it, you want to watch them. Because if they're the murderers, they're going to lead you straight to the body. And the reason being is they can't stand the idea of animals getting to the body and chewing it up and carrying it away or whatever. So that's always something you want to do, is watch those guys. And it looked like John was trying to lead his friend towards Martha's body.
And also maybe Julie the night before.
Exactly. Because, he wanted the body to be found. He just didn't want to be the one to find it himself. But again, I'm not. Oh yeah, and there were also some potential blood stains in the TV room on a table in there.